to send me a chat or a thumbs down if you can't hear me, but hopefully you can. And this has been recorded. So it's the first of a series of 3 briefings we're running monthly, starting today. We have a second in the series in April and then in May. So we will build upon this particular topic, starting with spending priorities of consumers in the Irish marketplace based on iReach research. And we want to also show the breakdown by generation. So over the last few years, there's been a lot of interest in looking at Gen Z, looking at millennials and so on. So we're going to build upon that to hopefully share some interesting themes and trends in the year ahead. So I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to the definitions of generations. They vary. Most have the same labeling: Gen Z, Gen X, Gen Y, and so on. But sometimes the ages are a little bit different. We'll look at the priority spend items. So these are what you might call disposable spend items. So it's not like paying for your car insurance or your house insurance or health insurance, for example, or utility bills. It's about what might be seen as I said, as as disposable income. Then we're going to look at the buyer journey really through a couple of different lenses: social media in terms of the importance and the role of social media, trust in social media use. We'll touch upon influencers as well as brand trust, brand engagement, brand factors that really stand out on the buyer journey. And it's a little bit of a tangent, but we did some research earlier this year on cryptocurrencies. So while not necessarily directly related to this particular topic, we do show awareness and purchase and plans to purchase cryptocurrency across the different generations. So I said there's a lot to cover, and I'll keep pushing through as best I can. As I said, we are recording, so you don't need to take down too much. So just a very quick overview of iReach. A lot of the research we do, and particularly for this particular series of briefings, we use our consumer decisions panel. So this is a panel that has 40,000 members nationwide that we use for all our research, be surveys such as this, focus groups, in-depth interviews, and so on. Separately, we have a business decisions panel, which comprises about 9,000 business decision makers across companies of all sizes, from small, mid, large SMEs up to corporate and enterprise organizations. We do a lot of work in media and ad effectiveness, and that's where a lot of what we're touching on today has a strong bent to it. A couple of our other unique services include video at home, where we can do product tasting and testing amongst families in their home environment. And I suppose a product or a service we're probably very well known for is a at least twice monthly consumer omnibus. So this is a nationwide survey we run, delivers 1,000 responses, and different clients can pop questions in. So normally there are 5 to 10 questions, and it's a very cost-effective way of doing nationwide research. We have some specialist panels, our teen and youth panel, and all our members use our iReach Conversations platform. This is where they engage in surveys, discussion forums, idea generation, fun polls, and other research activities. And for a lot of our particularly clients in retail, we do a lot of work around segmentation, which we're going to cover in the 3rd briefing in May, in terms of how we even go deeper than just generations to really target your buyer cohorts. So enough about us. So just reason why I'm showing you this slide is because we want to make sure that people know how it's designed and its robustness. So as I said, we deliver 1,000 responses on a nationwide basis each month. It's nationally represented by age, region, gender, and socioeconomics. And why that's important is any of our research findings, we can translate that into population numbers. So let's say if 10% of the population wish to buy a car or plan to buy a car, we will know that that equates to, let's say, about 350,000, 360,000 adults in Ireland. So that gives a huge amount of extra layering in terms of the scale and the size of some of these findings. And it has a margin of error of 2.5%, so plus or minus 2.5%. So it's really robust. We've run the research over a series of waves over the last 2 months, and this is the first, as I said, of 3 briefings. So just to recap, most of you are probably very familiar with generations. As I said, millennials were the go-to cohort targeting a couple of years ago. Gen Z are now coming on stream as a new targeted buyer cohort, and there are different titles for some of these generations. But in terms of, just to give you background again, so you don't need to write all this down, but it's more just to put into context. So Gen Z, we're talking about those being born between 1997 and 2007. So they'll be hitting 21 somewhere between 2018 and 2028. So you can see how they're coming from late teens, early adults, and how their life stages are likely following leaving school, going through college, getting their first job, and so on. So an interesting group to track, and we've done a lot of research on the educational journey through those teen and youth panel that I mentioned, right through to the early stages of adulthood. Gen Y, also known as millennials, mainly in Ireland, is the tag most commonly used, born between 79 and 1996. So at the minute this year, they'll be aged between 29 and 46. So again, likely to be well on their career journey, likely to be getting married or in relationships, likely to be starting families and so on, and certainly planning or hoping to get on the property ladder. Fairly well balanced across gender, heavily urban weighted compared to rural, so probably 2/3 urban, 1/3 rural for this particular cohort. Then Gen X, born between 66 and 78, so again hitting their early 20s in 87 to 99, so currently 47 to 59. So these would be in, you know, well established careers, probably on the property ladder, probably with older children, and again a fairly equal balance of gender, and again reasonably urban weighted also. And then finally boomers, and that's for pretty much everyone born after 1966. Again, much stronger rural bias compared to urban, but again reasonably balanced in terms of gender. So it's interesting, one of the things we see consistently across generations is that balance. Is quite similar gender-wise, as well as that urban-rural split is quite consistent as well. So part one, priority spend items for 2025. So the question we asked was, what was your number one priority spend item for 2025? And we gave a list of what we think are kind of the most common disposable income purchases people are likely to make in the year ahead. 75% of all adults have plans, 25% have no plans. When we broke those out, the most popular, the most important priority for adults in Ireland are travel and experience at 28%. And what we have is we have a slide on each of these to give a little bit more detail behind it. Home and property, no surprise there, 18%. Motor vehicle or personal travel purchase, 12%. Some interesting findings on health and well-being at 12%. As I said, people had a single select, so they could just pick one priority, even though adults are likely to spend across multiple priorities. When we break that down for the first time into the different generations, not a lot of surprises on this particular slide. However, we see millennials at 20% in terms of looking at property and home priorities. And then if I look over far right, it's interesting, we look at Gen Z, 21% see health and wellness as a priority. And I said we'll explore these in the next few slides. And then those, while they will remain reasonably large spend sectors, they're not the number one priority. So if those figures look low, don't be surprised, because I said we asked them just to pick one or their top spending priority in terms of the year ahead. So when we look at travel, as I said, 28% plan, or the number one priority, is travel. So travel is estimated at about 7 billion across local and overseas travel. So it's an extraordinarily huge spend item or spend area. 55% of those that prioritize travel in the year ahead are looking to have a family holiday. 33% looking at a special holiday. Traveling for a wedding, stag and hens, family events, and so on. When we look at those by generations, starting over on the left, that's pretty consistent across all generations, slightly higher for Gen Z. So we're working on the assumption that they're going on family holidays that somebody else is paying for, looking at that particular age group. Boomers, special holidays. So if you remember, boomers are likely to be coming into retirement or have retired. And again, they could be cruises or other special trips to bucket list locations, for example. You'll see for weddings and stags, it's the highest amongst millennials. Again, no surprise there, is that that age group is coming into marriage and partnerships and so on. And then over at the far right, other Gen Z9. So these are younger age groups coming out of college or maybe going to the US or Australia to work during the summer or for longer in that one. Home improvements, there's some interesting findings on this. So 42% of those that have a spend priority in property are looking at home improvements, 24% looking at new carpets and furniture. And for both of those, you see that they're highest for Gen X and boomers. So that's into your late 40s, early 50s and beyond. And again, these age groups are most likely to have been on the property ladder for a while. Buying first home, moving home or upsizing, 7%, and interesting, downsizing, 3%. And I think that's a great correlation with home improvements on the left, 42 and 24%, because we know that property supply is limited. The costs of downsizing in terms of property are probably much more expensive now than ever before. So what it looks, and certainly what it looks, as I can see in my area where I live, the amount of extensions being built, the amount of energy retrofitting taking place, heat pumps and so on being installed. So I think we're very much seeing a theme where those older age groups, rather than moving or downsizing, are staying where they are and investing in their existing homes in terms of extending or upgrading or enhancing. Those looking to buy a first-time home at 19%, you'll see that's highest amongst millennials at 44%. So getting on the property market and moving or upsizing, that's another 10%. So again, moving into their second home or a larger home, again, likely driven by family life stages. I was a little surprised with this renting a property at 15%. I thought it would be higher, but again, we know rental is hugely expensive. Supply is reasonably okay, but at what cost? Highest amongst Gen Z at 20% and millennials at 10%. Small amounts of property investment here and overseas. Next, we look at vehicle spend, worth an estimated 5 billion in Ireland last year, according to Euromonitor. The highest focus is, or the highest priority is on a car or SUV. And again, really strong outside of Gen Z groups, as you would expect, across millennials, Gen X and boomers. So a big expectation there in new car purchases. An interesting theme we're seeing, which we probably would have seen back in the 90s, those amount driving around on motorbikes and scooters is growing. It's worth about between 25 and 30 million, believe it or not, in the Irish marketplace. And we see that highest at Gen Z. Then we look at bikes, e-bikes, again, worth about 25 million across your bicycles and your e-bikes. And again, highest amongst millennials for a normal bicycle at 6%. And 2% Gen Z on e-bikes. Health and well-being, priority for 12% of adults. So 36% are saying they're going to invest in a health tracker. So again, according to research, we've seen this, what they call digital health or digital well-being is worth about 200 million in the Irish marketplace. It's hard to track because so much of the spend is subscription based. So you have your tracker, be it your watch or your phone app, and a lot of the spend is actually on subscription, but certainly that's the estimate we saw from Euromonitor at 200 million. Again, highest amongst Gen Z at 50% and millennials at 52%. So a really strong investment there. And interesting enough, boomers 43%. So a strong view on health and well-being in 2025. Gym membership and coaching and training is estimated to be worth about 250 million in Ireland. And as we see, this is a priority for 15% of those that are focusing on health and well-being. Again, highest amongst millennials and Gen X. Sports club membership, interesting, 21% of Gen Z see this as a priority, which I think is great to see. As we know, often as those kind of teens move into adulthood, they drop out of sports, especially girls. So I think that's great to see that focus. New sports equipment and gear, and then interesting, at the very far right, personal home and gym equipment, highest at Gen X. Again, we're working on the assumption of maybe children leaving home, a room becoming available, and it's being turned into a gym or a home exercise environment or studio. Then finally, not finally, but certainly just on the two lower focus areas in terms of priorities, appliances. 36% are spending on kitchens, and I'll come back to that. Across smart devices, averaging between 11 and 15% in terms of investment there. Surprisingly low on smart homes, but I think most people have invested in smart homes. However, it's highest amongst boomers at 13%, maybe slow to come into that smart home environment. In that context, appliances are worth between 650 and 700 million, depending on what definition you have of appliances. However, when we drop down into which electrical appliances, especially, again, I think this is consistent with what we've seen previously in terms of priorities for property. So heat pump is a priority for, and the highest amongst millennials at 25%. So again, that maybe is looking at be more eco-aware and be more cost-conscious of energy, especially. Fridge and ovens, cookers, hobs, again, more interest to Gen X and boomers, so those older ones. So again, that would suggest that these could be aligned with kitchen upgrades or kitchen replacements and so on. So I think certainly at those older age groups, everything around priority and improving the home seems to be a very strong indicator. And then finally, small appliances. Events, the final slide in terms of those spend priorities. Weddings are estimated to be worth over 750 million in Ireland. Confirmation and communions worth between 70 and 80 million. So they're big spend items. Gen X, you'll see for weddings, looks like they might be paying for a lot of weddings. For communions and confirmations, millennials at 36%. So again, that ties directly in with that age group. Significant birthday, higher amongst those older age groups, could be the 60th or 50th in terms of those special events. So again, big spend items in the year ahead. So finally, on this section, we ask how people expect to pay for these spend priorities. So 57% expect to pay from savings and cash, so they're not going to borrow. 17% will have a mix of savings and borrowings, joining with 10% who are considering or planning a short-term borrowing. And these will be heavily aligned with what's being purchased. You would assume savings and cash will be for lower value items where borrowing might be needed for, be it cars or home improvements or bigger ticket appliances. 8% borrowing or hoping to borrow from family and friends, highest amongst Gen Z. Long-term borrowing, 7%, credit cards, 6%. And again, these will be highly tightly aligned with what's being purchased. However, we've been tracking buy now, pay later over the last couple of years, and this continues to grow year on year. So 6% doesn't look a lot, but that is highest amongst Gen Z. This is especially high if you're in, clothes and cosmetics, those lower value purchases. Okay, so that's that section in terms of where disposable income is being prioritized in the year ahead. The next section, we're going to look at decision-making through social media and advertising. So we're looking at those influences that affect trust in a brand, that affects the purchase decision-making. So we ask, and again, I don't think there's many surprises here in terms of what's being used. WhatsApp as a social platform is the most popular, 77%, highest amongst those older age groups. Facebook, again, is still popular amongst older age groups, especially Gen X and boomers. Instagram, we know, is hugely popular with those younger age groups. So again, highest amongst Gen Z at 78, millennials at 63. LinkedIn, well, we know people aren't advertising brands too much on LinkedIn, but again, it is a really important and trusted platform, likely used by Gen Z for job or job-related activities. Same for millennials. Millennials are probably more likely to be building their networks and building their careers, where Gen Z are more likely to be using LinkedIn to start their career. TikTok, we know, is hugely popular amongst those younger age groups, nearly 46 or over 46% of Gen Z. Millennials are still on X at 33%, ours are Gen X. So while it's plummeted in terms of use and trust, it's still out there in those particular age groups. The final run, Snapchat, again, no surprises in terms of how and who uses Snapchat at 39%. We've added in some of the newer platforms with the, I suppose, the problems that Twitter, the transitions that Twitter has gone through. If I go back to Reddit, that's really becoming popular as a discussion forum. And again, it's become very popular in terms of sharing product and brand experience. So used by a lot of Gen Z at 39% and millennials at 29%. The newer ones aren't terribly popular. Discord, surprisingly, however, 24% of Gen Z have used or are using it. We added in Blue Sky. Obviously, that became very highly discussed as X were going through their issues. Again, really low usage, 5%. We threw in Truth Social just to see, again, as a very spoken about platform, the usage in that. So it's 1% overall, mostly amongst Gen Z. And then on the far right, it's people who don't use any of the social media sites. So it's all in single figures. So a widespread of usage. I suppose usage and trust have really been brought into focus with the likes of changes to X, Facebook, changing their content management controls, in terms of protecting content and protecting users. So we wanted to see what's trusted and how important is trust. So WhatsApp is highest, followed by LinkedIn. Again, they're probably the lower ones that have brand engagement. Pinterest, Instagram, Reddit. Again, it's interesting as Reddit because it's a very strong community-based platform, is trusted and has high levels of trust. So they're the top 5. The next 5, Facebook, again, still a trusted platform amongst millennials. Again, Discord, Blue Sky have reasonable levels of trust, and it looks like millennials are the most trusting or give the highest trust score for a lot of these newer or less mainstream platforms. That's the middle 5. And then the bottom 5, TikTok obviously gets a lot of attention due to its Chinese heritage. Threads, Hive Social, maybe because they're quite new, not terribly well known. Second least trusted, X, no surprise there, and the least trusted is Truth Social. Again, I don't think there's any huge surprises in any of those. But it's interesting in terms of how millennials trust a wide range of social media platforms more than others. How does this translate into brand trust? So we're looking at how do brands, or what's important for brands, what's important for consumers in relation to brands? What are the factors which influence your trust in a brand? And we gave a list of different brand attributes that are most common across a range of different sectors. And brand look and feel, no surprise, is the most important at 39% as the key factor which influences trust, highest amongst Gen Z at 52% and reasonably consistent for the rest. Then a lot of the lists were related to diversity, CSR, corporate social responsibility factors that are important. So fair wages comes out for 3 and 10 buyers. Sustainability, 29%. Transparency of ethics, social responsibility. And you'll see some of those are much more important to older age groups. So for fair wages, really higher levels of importance for Gen X and boomers. Social responsibility, higher levels of an important factor for, again, Gen Z and boomers. So across different generations, such brand attributes do vary in terms of importance. Diversity, 18%. Community engagement, again, high amongst millennials. And then we look at advertising. So we know advertising is critical in building a brand, but in terms of does it influence trust in a brand, that comes up at 14%. Engagement with social media comes up at 6%, and influencers come up at 5%. And we've a bit more on particularly on the influencer, because the influencer role has changed, as you would all know, in the last couple of years due to concerns with transparency and those endorsements, are they really true and honest, or how heavily funded are they? So we'll come back to influencers on that. So while we know advertising is important, we know social media is important, we know influence is important, they have lesser role in building brand trust. Moving on to purchasing. So what factors are most important to you when deciding what brands to purchase? So I don't think there's a huge surprise here. Price and quality. Again, because this is across all different purchase segments. And again, we do live in challenging times with financial pressures across through inflation and everything else. It's interesting when we look at price and quality. They're least important to Gen Z compared to the older age groups, which is interesting. Product appearance is most important to Gen Z. So this is the look and feel, the branding, the packaging, and the merchandise, how it all comes together. So that's really important for Gen Z. And then pretty consistent across all generations as product fit. So that's product quality, as we've mentioned. Is it the right product? Is it the right brand? And that comes out as important for 3 and 10. While we know brand identity isn't the biggest factor, we do know it's important. And I think it's when somebody dislikes a brand or hates a brand, they're never going to buy from that brand. So we know it's important that there is trust and confidence in the brand, but it's not just about that's not just going to get somebody to buy the product. In most instances, it will make it easier for people to buy the product. Ethical practices, source of materials, lesser importance, but still important to 1 in 5 of all adults, and slightly higher for Gen Z. And then interesting, which we'll come back to, friends, advocacy, peers, in terms of what they think, again, is lower when it comes to deciding which brand to purchase, but we'll see in a few minutes, it's hugely important when it comes to which product to purchase. And as I said, we'll come back to role models in a couple of moments. Finally, I think on this section, just to finish out on the journey, we wanted to ask where people, what one place do you start your journey? We know that people will work across most of these different parts of the purchase journey in terms of making a purchase decision, but we all know that search is the most common and remains the most common starting point on the journey, at 38% highest amongst Gen Z, but still hugely important for Gen X and boomers. A mix of store online, again, likely to be important for older generations, Gen X and boomers, but again, quite consistent across all the different generations. Family advice, and I think this is the difference between purchase product versus brand. 17% look to advice from family and friends, which we know is hugely important. 11% start with a store visit, so more popular with millennials in terms of their journey, getting in, seeing the product, seeing the placement and so on. And then growing in popularity, and as we'll see later on in terms of the role of comparison sites, we mentioned Reddit. So there are a growing importance in being able to share experience. Obviously, YouTube has a lot of shared experience in terms of brands and unpacking new purchases and so on. So I think that's really been growing in terms of those recommendations from like-minded or other people that have tried the brand. As I said already, we know advertising is important, we know influence is important, but again, people do not start their journey on these. It's rare that people will see an ad on TV or listen to an ad on radio and then immediately make a purchase. It's not impossible, it does happen. And the same for influencers. It's unlikely that somebody will just buy based on what they see in influencers. So we know these are important, but the question was, where do you plan to start your journey? And as I said, likely that people will go through as part of journey many or all of these different touch points. We asked them what's most important as part of this customer journey. So word of mouth again comes up. As I mentioned, price comparison websites comes up. So that's obviously, we know those from the likes of Switcher and Switcher, obviously for utilities, there are others, for telecommunications, there are others. So again, that's growing in importance all the time, and really growing in terms of, as I mentioned, the likes of Reddit and so on. TV we've mentioned, so we know it's important. We know that it has a huge influence in terms of both brand identity, brand trust, as well as product education. Digital ads, 16% highest amongst millennials, highest amongst Gen Z, and Instagram important across those Gen Z and millennials as well. Facebook has a role. Looking at more traditional media, newsprint, outdoor posters. Interesting with outdoor posters, highest amongst Gen Z and millennials, and maybe they're out, commuting on the DART or buses, or regionally on different bus shelters and so on. So that still has an interesting role, surprisingly, for younger age groups, which you mightn't have expected. Radio remains important for boomers and older groups. And then streaming, we're seeing growing in importance all the time. And obviously we see a lot of ads, and with more and more streaming services and more opportunity of advertising, this does become important, more especially for millennials. Again, more traditionally, magazines, 7%, again, more important for older age groups. Influencers we'll come back to. Twitter, almost non-existent anymore. And then other was mainly the likes of podcasts or pre-recorded or post-recorded shows, where you're playing a recorded program, or like listening to yesterday's news today. So they're kind of podcasts and digital recordings of radio content. Just to finish out this section on influencers, we asked, did people follow influencers? 54% said yes. Do people follow brand personalities or a brand? So 54% yes, they follow a brand or a personality or both. And if we look to the right-hand side, we'll see 19% follow a brand, highest amongst Gen Z at 27%. 15% follow a personality, again, highest amongst Gen Z and millennials, and then 20% follow both. So that gives us our 54%. We ask what type of brands or identities, personalities do they follow? So highest is across clothing brands and clothing stores, followed by grocery and department stores. So they're the highest in terms of that wider spread of different generations. Then we look at everything else in the middle. So celebrities, reality stars, brand ambassadors, 48% follow these groups, highest amongst Gen Z at 59%. Music brands, again, consistent across all age groups, in their 40s, in the percentages in their 40s. Food and drinks brands, highest amongst Gen Z. Social media influencers, which we'll come back to, highest amongst Gen Z at 56%. And we've covered the stores as well. So you can see there's a lot, even though people suggest that the role of the influencers or role model might be not as strong as other areas of the purchase journey, they still have a big role and still a big impact. Finish out TV shows, 63%, cosmetic brands, that will jump up to nearly 60% for females. Tech brands and companies, that will jump up to over 40% if we look at males. So they do vary by gender as well as by age. And then we see the last few politicians, which again that's one in five follow politicians, 1 in 5 follow newspapers, and just under 1 in 5 follow activists. So again, it's still a very broad spread of influencers or personalities that are being followed. So we asked specifically, does your role model, or the role models you follow influence the brands you purchase? So 15% say yes, they do. That's highest at 32% of Gen Z. 37% feel they have somewhat of a role, or sometimes they have a role. That's highest at 46%. So that still gives us 52%. Over 1 in 2 say social media influencers. And I think more recently and probably more realistically, brands are moving to role models, ambassadors, away from celebrity influencers. And obviously that's very much related to the brand. We asked, what traits do you look for in a role model or a brand ambassador? Intelligence comes out strongest at 62%. Confidence, that's highest from Gen Z at 67% or 58% overall. Relatability, and this is key, and we see this in so many different pieces of research we run. People like engaging and look to engage or follow ambassadors or role models that they can relate to. It doesn't mean that they're exactly like them, but they can relate to. And I think that's something we see more and more. That comes out for 1 and 2 of all adults. Sense of humor comes out 47%. Independence, and this ties back into trust, that people want to see that a brand ambassador, even if it is representing a brand, they're still independent, they're still trusted, and you can still believe what they're saying. Next, kind of next down, success, charitability, uniqueness, good fashion sense, which obviously would be important in certain categories, obviously fashion and cosmetics. And then the last and the least of any great sense of traits that people want to see in a role model: wealth, political activity, good looks, and popularity in social media. So it's interesting when people are looking at who they want to follow or who they want to believe in as a role model. They're quite different than what we might see on social media, which very often centers on influencers with good looks and popular and displaying senses of wealth and success. So I think we're making good progress. So while, as I said, it's a bit of a tangent, we just thought it was interesting findings. So it's not necessarily exactly tied to this, but it's no harm to those of you that have any interest even in just cryptocurrency as a thing, coming from nowhere and suddenly worth billions upon billions. So we asked, are people, or what cryptocurrencies are people aware of? So Bitcoin is the one that most people are aware of, but what you'll see without going through each one in detail, the awareness is quite strong across so many different brands. And again, if you look at Bitcoin, 65% of Gen Z are aware of it. That jumps up to 79% of Gen X. So again, it's really interesting how even those older age groups who might have a lot less trust in cryptocurrencies are aware of so many of these. Again, strongly across Gen Z and millennials and all of the other brands or cryptocurrencies, coming in at about 30%. They have the highest level of awareness across a wide range of different currencies, which really surprised me. So I jump over to to the right, none of the above. So 19% are unaware of any cryptocurrency, which means 81% of all adults in Ireland are aware of some cryptocurrencies, which I just found extraordinarily huge. But again, it's on the news or in the news nearly, certainly weekly, if not daily. In terms of trust across the adult population, 10% have some level of trust in cryptocurrencies, which I would have expected. That jumps up to 24% of Gen Z, and maybe it's lucky they probably have the least amount of money to invest in crypto, but they have the highest level of trust, followed by millennials at about 18%. So again, it's really interesting that that trust is so strong for something that has a very checkered history, to say the least. 14%, which again is a number that really surprised me, own some form of cryptocurrency. We didn't ask the value, and maybe next time we might, in terms of what their values might be, but sometimes those sensitive questions are hard to get answered. But again, so nearly 1 in 4 millennials and 1 in 4 Gen Z, of those that own cryptocurrency, the highest are amongst millennials and Gen Z. Which do they own? Bitcoin. I won't go through all of these, but again, it's predominantly, again, reasonably spread. And again, which again surprised me, whether that's an intentional strategy or not, I don't know. And why, and this is interesting, why people own a cryptocurrency: get rich quick, highest amongst 1 and 2 Gen Z. Diversification, if you look at the highest there is boomers, and that could be, as I said, an investment strategy to diversify their own money, their retirement money, their pension. Decentralization, again, that might be something similar in terms of moving money out of more traditional investment funds. Obviously, that brings its own risks. And then easy and efficient transfer. So using it as money is the highest for Gen Z and millennials at 23% for all adults. Others, less important: privacy, instant payments, security, and others. So it's interesting that privacy and security don't really stand out too much in terms of why people own it. So I think that says its own message. Again, what's equally interesting: 18% plan to buy currency in 2025, which really surprised me. highest at Gen Z, again, as I said, probably low values, and then millennials at 28%, again, probably at low values. And which brands are they planning to buy, which I'll skip through. So that is that. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to take any questions. As I said, just